I am told that Josh Jacobs drove his car to the Raiders facility, was sitting in it with teammate Max Crosby at the deadline in case something came together. Obviously, that did not end up happening.
The same lesson.
Man, I'm tired of dealing with this. I'm tired of dealing with this. Like, every day I come here and bust. I see the guys, bust their and the result is not there. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't want to get franchise tagged. I mean, I feel like nobody really do. I wouldn't mind it if, they got the right guys in the building around us, like they got to, put some guys on defense, figured out the quarterback situation.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you thought the Raiders would not alienate another star player from their team, well, unfortunately, Genius Josh strikes again. Even after the Raiders made Josh Jacobs a team captain, even after Josh Jacobs became the #1 running back in the NFL last year, and despite the fact that Josh McDaniels, when he speaks publicly about Josh Jacobs, he praises him and considers him the core of the Raiders offense, well, the Raiders and Josh Jacobs have failed to negotiate a long-term contract, and now it looks like this guy might not even be on the team anymore. The Raiders and Josh Jacobs had until 1 p.m. Pacific time today to negotiate a long-term contract, or else Jacobs would be forced to play on the franchise tag unless he holds out. And it looks like holding out seems to be what's most likely going to happen for Josh Jacobs. Even though his social media posts are subtle, he's made it clear that he's taken a stand for running backs in the future, tweeting out that we have to do it for the ones after us. And keep in mind, he has not signed his franchise tag tenor, which means that the Raiders cannot fine him for missing training camp, and also the Raiders still have the option to rescind the franchise tag from Josh Jacobs. They could take the tag away and he could become a free agent, but they likely cannot trade this guy because the other team would have to give up 2 first-round picks. We all know that's not going to happen. Some people, some fans who are probably good people, but they've deluded themselves drinking that Josh McD Kool-Aid a little too much, and they naively thought that Josh Jacobs and the Raiders would negotiate a long-term contract. But it's been very clear to me, and I think very clear to Josh Jacobs, that the Raiders have not been interested in a long-term contract with him. Jacobs has implied that there's been no talks at all, and that is why we are where we are right now, where we have to wonder, after no deal being reached today, according to Adam Schefter, Josh Jacobs is not expected to report to training camp with the rest of the team, and the Raiders are not expected to see Jacobs until later this summer, if then, and Jacobs will have to make a decision as if he's going to even report to the first game of the regular season. And the Raiders social media team continues to be tone deaf, continues to not know what the hell they're doing and what to do at the right time. And they made another mistake today, right after it was announced that there's going to be no long-term deal between Josh Jacobs and the Raiders. Well, Genius Josh's social media team decided to post 55 days till the regular season. Throwback to Chandler Disappointing Jones. Check out him, number 55. And obviously they got roasted like a pack of pre-rolled J's in the comments. You have it right here. McDaniels is an evil coach. Pay Jacobs and stop playing. And this hilarious post, just this man's disappointed face, like, Raiders media team, what the hell are you doing, bro? And then you got Dave Ziegler in the clown face. We already know the fan base is disgusted at Josh McDaniels. Most fans can't even look at the guy, and now the fans are starting to turn on GM Dave Ziegler after he has failed to negotiate a long-term contract with arguably the best player in the history of the Raiders franchise. I know that's crazy to say, but check this out. Jacobs posted this on social media. He actually has the most scrimmage yards per game in Raiders history. I actually did not know this until he posted this earlier this week. And that's really crazy to think about. More than Marcus Allen, more than Clem Daniels, more than Charlie Gardner, and obviously more than Devontae Adams. This is per game, so this number will likely go down the more he plays. But after 4 years in the NFL, this is impressive to say the least. And Josh Jacobs has not really made many tweets ever since he had that one on June 10th about doing it for the ones after us, pretty much claiming he's willing to sacrifice his present situation for the running back market in the future, because a lot of people believe running backs are getting screwed right now. And that's why you had Jacobs here liking some tweets after the Raiders failed to negotiate a long-term contract with him, he liked Saquon Barkley's tweet, which says, "It is what it is." So both of these guys are very upset with their respective teams and the running back market right now. And he also liked Darren Carr's tweet right here, where Darren Carr, the brother of Derek Carr, former QB of the Raiders, if you don't know that, well, he basically played on the tag last year, best back in the league, just my 2 pennies, just his 2 cents, and Josh Jacobs like this. And I kind of find this, really interesting, because Jacobs said that he wouldn't mind playing on the franchise tag if they built a team around him. He said this on NBC's Pro Football Talk when talking to Chris Sims and Mike Florio.
I wouldn't mind it if, they got the right guys in the building around us, like they got to, put some guys on defense, figured out the quarterback situation, got some guys up front. Then I would be like, okay, I really wouldn't mind coming back, on a franchise tag. But if you want me to come back and be the hero, then you have to pay me like a hero.
And it seems like he does not believe that the Raiders built much around him, and that starts with the quarterback position. Now take a look at this. Many teams have not had a 4,000-yard passer in a long time, one of those teams being the San Francisco 49ers, even though they've had Jimmy Garoppolo, who the Raiders team media likes to tell you is such a winner. Well, this guy hasn't thrown for more than 4,000 yards ever in his career, and the Niners have not had a QB to do that since Jeff Garcia. And the Raiders aren't on this list because Derek Carr has consistently thrown for over 4,000 yards. Last year was an exception because McDaniels. But you have to ask yourself this: would Jacobs be holding out right now, be not reporting to training camp, if the Raiders would have grabbed somebody like Aaron Rodgers, if they were able to convince Brady to play with them instead of retire? Jacobs would probably be a happier camper. At the same time, remember last year in the Steelers game in which the Raiders lost in the final few minutes, Jacobs criticized the play calling. He criticized Josh McDaniels, was upset that they did not run the ball because it was a historically cold game. It was one of the coldest games in the history of the NFL, and Jacobs explained that you gotta run the ball in those situations, and the Raiders and McDaniels refused to do that. Instead, they forced Derek Carr to throw and throw and throw.
I feel like in times where we was close and we felt like we was about to get a big one, we went away from it, and the pass game was working early, so, that is what it is. But to win these games, especially at the end of the stretch, especially when you up, against a team like this in the cold, you got to run the ball. So, I mean, that's a factor on everybody involved. From top to bottom.
Jacobs also liking this tweet by Jonathan Taylor, Colts running back, who's done very well despite being injured last year, saying, wow. Also liking the post from another content creator of the Raiders on Twitter, who's saying that the Raiders need to pay Josh Jacobs, and it just makes sense. And so he's liking all these tweets of people upset with the situation. He's criticizing Josh McDaniels' play calling last year. He claimed he'd play on the tag if the Raiders built around him. They obviously didn't. And he also likes posts by the brother of the QB who got shafted by the Raiders last year. Seems like Josh Jacobs isn't too happy with the front office, to say the least. Now, there are some running backs who make a lot of money in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, typically running backs who could also do some things in the receiving game. And there are a lot of running backs who are not doing well financially right now. The market is collapsing for them. Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones took pay cuts to stay with their teams, Bengals and Packers. And then you got Ezekiel Elliott, who I remember at one point was one of the hottest running backs in the NFL. Well, this guy's not even on a team, along with Dalvin Cook, who was cut by the Vikings, and Leonard Fournette, who was released by the Bucks. Then you got Saquon Barkley. That situation is a disaster, coupled with the fact that Austin Eckler with the Chargers is also upset about his situation. So this is a horrible situation for the Raiders to be in. And Jacobs, on one level, the Raiders feel like they cannot pay this guy because the market is saying you should do otherwise. On another level, Jacobs is the best running back in the NFL right now, and he proved it last year. And when you have somebody like Josh McDaniels, who has alienated so many fans and so many players from this team and has made this locker room more fragile than we've ever seen it, you would think the Raiders, since they have a quarterback that they're not spending too much money on because of his injury history, because he's not the guy to necessarily get it done by himself, he needs help around him, you would think they would invest heavily in a running back to help carry this team and help build morale with this locker room. But instead, they have chosen to go with with the latest trend in the NFL, which is to not pay running backs. And now for Josh Jacobs, it appears like his strategy with his agent is to not show up to training camp at all. Why risk getting hurt? Do not sign the franchise tag, because as long as you don't sign it, you cannot be fined, and that leaves the door open for the Raiders to rescind that tag so you can become a free agent and test the market. But based on how the market's been going, Jacobs might not be getting what he wants unless he knows on the down low he could get something special. Jacobs could show up week 1 right before the first game of the regular season in September and say, hey, I'm here, sign the tag, get paid that $10 million fully guaranteed, and probably not have to play that much because he wouldn't be there for practice, he wouldn't know any of the plays, the Raiders probably would not want to throw him in there. So from the Raiders' perspective, they might actually want to rescind that franchise tag so they're not paying $10 million for a running back who's not happy, not showing up to practice, and wanting to test free agency. Now, if Jacobs thinks there's no way that they are gonna rescind his tag, and if he definitely does not want to play with the Raiders, and look, I think Jacobs and Barkley's situations are different, and this is because I do not trust Josh McDaniels as a coach. I think he is the 30th ranked head coach in the NFL right now, and I think that's different with the Giants and Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll was able to make it work with the current quarterback on the Giants and get to the playoffs in his first year. Josh McDaniels was not. And there was a lot of momentum around the Giants. I mean, they got other great players who they gotten for 3rd round picks like Darren Waller. There's just a lot of hype there, and the NFC is for the taking. I think Barkley may eventually play on the tag because he's part of a more competitive team. Jacobs is not. Josh Jacobs may believe the Raiders are going to force him to play even though he's not showing up to practice, even though he doesn't really want to play on the tag. And if that's the case, the dude could hold out. We've seen people hold out in the past. Le'Veon Bell is the most famous example. In some ways, it did work out for the guy because he got paid by the New York Jets. They were just unsuccessful. Josh Jacobs could really do this. He could really be Le'Veon Bell 2.0 if he does not want to play for the Raiders this year, if he does not think they're going to do anything special, and if he feels screwed over based on the fact that they did not extend him. And when you look at this team, this defense got marginally better. I mean, it's Spillane instead of Denzel Perryman. You're going to hope that Tyree Wilson could be an inside pass rusher, even though he played on the outside almost all of last year at Texas Tech. And then you got to hope that Marcus Epps is going to be a huge upgrade, even though he was a guy who was on a loaded Eagles defense last year. And on top of that, outside of rookies like CJ Stroud and the Texans and Anthony Richardson on the Colts, the Raiders have probably the worst quarterback situation in the AFC. And that's because the AFC is very competitive this year. But you got a guy who, even when he's healthy, even when he is the most healthy, he's never thrown for over 4,000 yards. He's never been that dynamic, and the Niners felt the need to move on from him. It's tough for Jacobs to really be sold on the Raiders right now, and I really believe, based on what Jacobs decides to do week 1, if he decides to completely hold out, that is going to say a lot about what he thinks about the Raiders team right now and Josh McDaniels. We have learned so much about the Raiders based on this Josh Jacobs situation alone. The fact that they weren't willing to give this guy just 2 to 3 years fully guaranteed, something like that, when you're saving money at the quarterback position because you're downgrading from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo, I think it proves that they are not serious about winning this year. Josh Jacobs, if he is forced to play on the tag, is not going to be playing lights out like he did last year. Just like Darren Carr said, he pretty much played on the tag last year, wrist injury, and I don't think he's going to be going all out this year after the Raiders failed to negotiate a long-term contract with him. I think if he does play on the tag, he's going to probably just be half in, half out, probably try to take some plays off, try to keep himself healthy so he could test free agency the next year. When you look at the Raiders in free agency, they did not really spend big, and there was no player that signed with their team who could have gotten more money elsewhere. Jacoby Myers has made numerous comments about the fact that the Patriots paid Juju Smith-Schuster instead of him. He seemed upset about that, and I don't think people were busting down walls trying to sign Robert Spillane. The Raiders did nothing in terms of the offensive line, bringing back the exact same cast, and the first round pick, the most important offseason selection outside of the quarterback position, the Raiders grabbed an edge rusher who's not 100% healthy and who's expected to make an impact mainly in year 2. So to me, the Raiders are rebuilding. It's a fact. It's unavoidable. It's something that we have to admit. It's something that we have to call out. We cannot delude ourselves and act like the Raiders spent big in free free agency, made some home run draft selections to compete for a championship. They did not at all this past offseason. If the Raiders would have extended Josh Jacobs, then it would make sense. Okay, we're going cheaper at quarterback. We're going to play smash mouth football. We're going to be a little different and still try to compete in the AFC West. But instead, last year, the Raiders extended Davante Adams, has pissed him off where he's saying he does not see eye to eye with the front office right now. They extended Derek Carr and ended up having to release him and get absolutely nothing for him. Then they extended Darren Waller, and oh, well, it's great. They got a 3rd round pick for him. Oh, hooray for Josh McDaniels and the Raiders. And then they also extended Hunter Renfrow, who we all know they're shopping. Everybody's talking about how they're shopping Hunter Renfrow, and they got all these slot receiver replacements behind him. And the one guy who went all out was number 1 at his position. He got no contract offer and instead is forced to play on a franchise tag. We will see how Davante Adams feels about this. Outside of Davante Adams, Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, and possibly Colton Miller, the Raiders are really not fully invested in many other players, and if it wasn't for these contracts of these certain players, the Raiders would be prime real estate for rebuild. But instead, they're in this horrible situation where they're spending tons of money and yet still rebuilding. We'll see how this all plays out. Training camp is around the corner. We'll find out the health status of quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo. If you want more Raiders content from me, WiFiWillie, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next video. Peace out. I hope you have a good one.